Hi, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome back to Series 5 of the Climate Pioneers Show, Funding a Better Future. Throughout the course of this series, we have been focused on angel investing for impact. We've been digging into why angel investment is such an important part of the early fundraising journey for a founder and how they can be best prepared for the challenges that they may face along the way. We've also been exploring the lack of gender equity in the world of angel investment, why climate is a wise investment strategy, and how you can begin your own angel investing journey. So whether you're a founder looking to raise investment for the first time, or whether you're an aspiring angel investor yourself who's keen to learn more, hopefully there should be plenty for you to get stuck into throughout the course of the series. This is episode 5, so if you've missed any of our previous 4 episodes, you can catch up either on LinkedIn by going to my profile, on the Above and Beyond YouTube channel, or in podcast format. We're on Spotify, Acast, and Apple Podcasts. So today we are joined for episode 5 by Molly Allington, co-founder and CEO of Albotherm. Albotherm are developing a glass coating which turns from transparent to white to reduce the amount of heat absorbed in buildings and greenhouses and allows them to better regulate their temperature. In summer 2023, so summer last year, they closed a seed raise of 1.6 million led by Green Angel Ventures. And we had Cam Ross, the CEO of Green Angel, in the show earlier this week on Tuesday. So nice little segue there into today's episode. I also absolutely love showcasing and championing founders like Molly, who I hope she won't mind me saying is a very young founder under the age of 30, and Albotherm is a fully female-founded business. So Molly, thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be on.
Perfect. Now, so I spoke to Cam on Tuesday, and he said, I have to ask you about your founder journey. So talk me through what led you to start Albotherm. What was that journey?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I got involved with what kind of became Albotherm while I was at university. So I was an undergrad studying chemistry at the University of Bristol. I really knew that I wanted to kind of do something in the sciences, but not necessarily in a lab role. And then one of my lecturers was kind of an opportunity came about where they wanted an undergraduate to do a kind of summer research project with one of their PhD students who had developed a really cool technology. And so I signed up, and that was where I met Sian, who is my co-founder now and Albotherm CTO. So she'd been developing the technology for the last few years, already had the kind of idea for the product and for how it was going to be applied. And the more involved I got, the more kind of interested in the project I was. And I did most of the kind of market research at that time. And then we set up Albotherm back in 2021 when we both graduated.
Amazing. And what took it from being just a summer project to you thinking, actually, no, let's spin this out. Let's turn this into something of its own. Was there a kind of a moment?
I don't know if there's necessarily one moment, but it was just, I think we just started to realize the more we kind of looked into the market that actually this could be something really useful and really impactful, particularly in the greenhouse space. We're getting a lot of really good feedback. We had Duncan Case, who worked at the University of Bristol at the time, was really encouraging of us. He kind of worked kind of meeting up industry and academics. So it's really encouraging, kind of pushing us forward and eventually put us forward for the iCure program, which is funded by Innovate UK. So that's a program that enables university researchers to apply for funding to do a market validation course. So I did that course back in 2019. So you basically travel the world for 3 months, going to conferences and talking to partners. The feedback again was just really positive. People really seemed interested in the idea for the business, and that allowed us to kind of go on and get further grant funding. So we won off the back of that a £300,000 Innovate UK grant to develop our first kind of prototype coating and to do some initial tests.
Amazing. That's so cool. And at what point in the journey did you think, once the kind of grant, you'd had a sort of a number of grants, at what point did you think, right, we need to go out and raise some dilutive funding now? Do we need to either go down the angel or VC route?
Yeah, so after we got the first grant was when we knew that we needed some funding. So the way that Innovate UK grants work is you have to match some of the project costs. So they'll give 70% of it. You need to find the other 30%. So we already knew that we needed kind of a small amount of funding to get us off the ground then. So we set out to raise about £160,000. That was right in the middle of lockdown. So it was really kind of tough raising at that time. Everyone was getting used to doing everything online. It did, take quite a while for us to kind of gain some initial traction when we, hadn't really had the connections and stuff into investors. But yeah, we ended up raising in 2021 that first round of kind of pre-seed money, mostly through Sustainable Ventures, who's a early stage kind of climate investor, and then we had a couple of other angels on the investment table at that time as well.
Amazing. And how difficult was it during that time to be trying to commercialize a physical, tangible product when you can't go out and see people and meet people and show it to them? How did you go work your way through that process?
Yeah, it was really difficult with the kind of access to labs. So we were still kind of based at the university at that time. So we didn't have funding to kind of set up anywhere else. So we had a little bit of access to labs, but because of the pandemic, it was kind of 50% kind of accessibility as to what you'd normally have. You weren't able to be in there all the time because they were trying to reduce numbers. So it did really slow that kind of progress. But it did kind of on the positive side mean that we had a lot more time kind of at home working at our desks. I think there was really no distractions at that time. So just able to kind of throw ourselves fully into the fundraising process and writing business plans and doing all of that kind of commercial side of it.
Amazing. So you got that final Innovate grant that you then match funded from Sustainable Ventures. And what did that unlock for you in terms of development? And, what did that money enable you to then do?
Yeah, I think looking back, I kind of really consider that the moment that Albotherm actually properly started. So we moved into lab space at Future Space up on the UE campus, and we hired our first staff. So we had research kind of team members for the first time, and we were able to set everything up and actually get the ball rolling on the proper R&D and be working at it full time. So that was really instrumental. And over that kind of couple of years, we developed a first prototype of our product, and then we tested it on research greenhouses at Rothamsted Research. So we had really promising results from that. In our greenhouse trials for about 3 months, we grew 3 basil crops, and compared to the kind of leading competitor, we had about 18% more light reaching the crops and about 34% more yield overall on average.
And talk us through the technology and what it is, because I gave a brief intro, but I'm sure I absolutely didn't do it justice, and you will do it far better than me. So talk us through what the technology is that you're developing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's a materials technology. So our first product is in the form of a coating, but it can be applied in other ways. So it's a retrofit water-based coating that's sprayed onto glass and is essentially completely transparent, or about 98% transparent when it's cold. It gradually turns whiter to be kind of opaque, frosted looking once it warms up. So that reflects the heat away. It also diffuses the light, which is something that's really helpful for crops. And then, protects the crops basically when they need it and allows light through the rest of the time. So what the industry does at the moment is they just use a kind of blanket white paint, which is put on in the spring and remains up over the whole summer. So it protects from the risk of a sudden heat wave wiping out the whole crop, but it's not very efficient when it comes to photosynthesis and kind of getting the most out of the crop, which is really important for the global need of food security and to produce more food.
Yeah. And is it very much focused on food production and greenhouses, or are there other sort of commercial applications for it as well?
Yeah, the greenhouse has been our main focus, but we do have other markets in mind. So the main one being the commercial buildings industry. The use of air conditioning is really huge in commercial buildings, especially abroad. There's a bit less of a need for it here, but worldwide it's probably one of the biggest energy usages. Accounts for about 20% of an average building's energy use and about 10% of global electricity all over the world. So our coating can help reduce the requirements on that. And from our kind of initial estimations, we think we could reduce about 3% of global electricity if it were implemented across all the buildings in the world.
Oh, wow. Amazing. Okay, cool. And so you were saying, taking it back to that fundraising journey, that you had this matched funding from Sustainable Ventures, which enabled you to move into lab space, to hire research scientists, to do some more R&D, and start to build out your first prototype, right? Is that what that enabled you to do? At what point did you then think, right, we need to raise the next round? And was that next round the seed round, or was there one that came in between?
Yeah, so I think we kind of already knew at the beginning that we were going to need to raise more funds. It was going to take us a bit of a while to get to market with a kind of deep tech physical product. So when we were getting to kind of the end of 2022, we were starting to think about fundraising. That was at that point we had just finished those research trials. We had really promising results. We did initially actually try to start a fundraise a little bit earlier. We didn't have quite the right success, and I think that was a really big learning for us, that the timing of the raise is really important and how it kind of presented to investors, because they were really keen to kind of see the physical results of it out in the world, but the seasons weren't quite right for us because we are quite a seasonal business. So it was about the end of 2022 we really kind of kicked off our seed raise, which closed then about 6 months later.
And what was your strategy going into that raise? Did you already have, I would imagine, from having tried to find your match funding previously, some warm contacts, a list of people that you could go back to? But I assume you would have had to add to that and make new approaches to people, and all the while trying to run a business. How did you manage to fit that in with the day-to-day of everything else that you had to do? And what was your kind of strategy around who you approached and why?
Yeah, we did reach out to a lot of new investors. We had a lot of help from our kind of previous investors and other. We've been through a few kind of incubator hub type things that were really helpful in kind of introducing us. I think there was a few things that we looked for when kind of putting an investor on our list. So we were definitely keen on kind of angel investors because we knew we were in the right kind of stage for it. Anyone that was in something kind of deep tech science based is always really helpful. And I think we did want to focus on having some kind of more strategic investors as well. So we did look for those with like market expertise, for example. We approached some of our potential trial customers as well, some of the greenhouses that we're working with about investment.
Amazing. And how did you know exactly how much you needed to raise? How did you figure that piece out? And combined with that, how did you know how to value the business? Was the valuation based on the previous valuation from the last raise? Or when you're doing something as new and disruptive as you're doing, what's your benchmark to value the business by?
Yeah, I think neither of them are an exact science, if I'm being honest. We changed the amount that we wanted to raise a few times. So we started off initially trying to raise 600K because that was what we think would get us through the next kind of 18 months and get us up to the point that we were ready for market launch. We then increased that off of the back of some feedback. I think because the market conditions at the time were so tough for raising investment, once we got investors interested and they were committed, across the board, all the investors said, just take more money because you don't want to have to be raising again. So we actually ended up raising, a lot more than we initially kind of set out to. So it was actually 1.2 million of equity funding, and then the rest was kind of grant funding. So it's double what we set out to raise initially. And in terms of the valuation, that was also is a tricky one to come to. There was a few things that we looked at. We got some information on kind of other startups, both people that we knew and, would share with us their valuations, but also kind of online, like PitchBook and Bowhurst kind of data. We also, looked at our kind of previous raise and the milestones that we'd achieved, and then also kind of tried to do a bit of a plan forward in terms of, if this was successful, where do we think our revenue is going to be at, and kind of use a bit of a revenue multiple model. But so I think we took all of those pieces and came to a sort of rough number, and then it just comes down to kind of the investors and whether they agree and kind of what you end up settling on.
Absolutely. And was there a big discrepancy between that number you came to, blending from those three different sources, and what investors thought? I mean, did you get much pushback on the valuation that you went out with?
I think they were all roughly in the same ballpark. We did get a bit of pushback, and we did end up probably closing at a slightly lower valuation than we initially hoped for. But again, I think market conditions were really tough at the time, and so I think definitely worth it still to have closed that kind of larger amount, even at a slightly lower valuation. I think it's made a really huge difference for the business, and actually we probably don't need to raise again for another year, even now.
That's amazing. You're right. I mean, definitely had some headwinds, right? Because you're right, 2023 was such an awful market to raise in. So the fact that you did, and for double the amount that you thought you wanted to, is incredible. I think also, you know, the stats show that it is much harder to raise external investment as an all-female founded team. And all-female founded teams get less than 2% of all VC investment. So and as first-time founders, right? So you had all of these kind of, I suppose headwinds is probably the wrong phrase, but you had all of these potential challenges against you, and yet still raised, you know, double the amount you set out to. So that's incredible. And did you find a lot of resistance through that fundraising process? How challenging was it? And what kind of objections and issues did you come up against when you were making those outreaches to investors?
Mm-hmm. It was initially very difficult. I think building that kind of credibility and the excitement around the business takes a lot of hard work and takes a lot of momentum. A lot of the kind of feedback we were getting was around the market, particularly with the agri-tech market. It can be a really tricky one to go into. It can be very lucrative, but you really need to get up to quite big volumes to kind of get to be earning good money from it. Farmers can be a bit conservative, and because of this seasonality, it just takes quite a long time to get into that market. And I think that was something investors were kind of concerned about and really kind of gave us a bit of a grilling on sometimes. But we found really huge traction once we got through the kind of due diligence process with Green Angel Ventures. They have a huge amount of kind of credibility in the industry. And I think at the time that we approached them, all of the other investors within the group were interested, but not committed. And I think they were really waiting for that lead investor that was going to kind of push the way and lead on due diligence and had that kind of big name behind them. So that really turned the tides for us in terms of the investment journey. And it was a lot easier at that point to kind of push to a close. And we were, completely overfunded. I mean, we even had to pull people back we had more on the table than that 1.2 that we did raise as well. So I think a lot of that is, you know, to do with that kind of getting Green Angels on board, really.
Yeah, getting that vote of confidence, like you said, from one that's very respected, and then the others that were sort of teetering on the edge, follow suit. And so talk me through that due diligence process. So we had Cam on Tuesday, and he talked a little bit about the kind of quite intensive process that the companies that are within the Green Angel portfolio go through, and how the experts within the syndicate can, you know, really deep dive into businesses. So I'd be really, really intrigued to hear from the founder perspective, what was that process like? What were you required to present? What areas of the business did they dig into? And talk us through that whole process.
Yeah, so they really looked at everything across the business, and then the areas that they kind of choose to dive into are dependent on the business, I would say. I mean, the financials is something that I think they do for every single business. For us, the technology was a really big part of it. So we were kind of currently applying for patents at the time of working with them. We hadn't quite submitted our patents yet. So there was a lot of kind of looking into what the technology actually was and trying to kind of ascertain its value, essentially. We did, big deep dive kind of into the markets. They interviewed some of the trial partners and potential partners that we were working with as well. So there was, it's definitely a lot more intense than any of the other due diligences we went through with the other angel syndicates. Though I would say each one kind of differs a little bit. And we did have a couple of more specialist angel groups on board that would kind of dive into different areas more. So we had an agri-tech focused one that was more on the market, and then one that was a little bit more scientifically focused. And the technology kind of DD there was a lot more rigorous.
And what were the kind of what did it teach you, I suppose, about your business and where the potential gaps or risks were within your business by going through that process?
I think probably on the financials was maybe the biggest thing in the plan that we changed after the due diligence process. We did kind of redo the financials quite significantly. We built in a lot more contingencies, and we kind of changed the model to account for, we started with one model, and then we had 4 or 5 different models that were kind of what if this were to happen, and then what if the worst case, what if the best case, and just kind of making sure that the amount that we were raising was going to be appropriate for like any one of those cases, and that we had a plan for how we would spend the money if we were delayed getting to market, or if the product really took off and we needed to suddenly scale a lot quicker than expected.
Right. And how did you know before going into the process to put a lot of this stuff together, right? And how did you know to build out those forecasts and a lot of the kind of business operations side of running a business and the strategy side of running a business, which unless you've worked in a startup environment before, you might not know. Did you have mentors, coaches, support as you were going through that journey? Was that all stuff that you'd learned from the accelerator programs that you'd been on, or literally was it just a case of muddle your way through and Google it? Like how did you learn?
Yeah, I think the accelerator programs that we've been on were probably the biggest help. So the Sustainable Ventures one, but we also went through the Spin Up Science Ventures program, and Ben, who's the CEO there, is on our board to this day. So he was really helpful in the fundraising process, kind of running up to our seed round close. Would kind of give us the templates for a lot of the things that we were expected to present and do practice pitches and that kind of thing. So yeah, both of our kind of previous investors were really helpful in that.
And at what time did you put a board together? Was that something that you did once you'd gone through your first raises, or had you done that earlier on to have that advisory support?
Yeah, we didn't have too formal of a board kind of before the seed round. So it was mostly myself and Sian, and then we brought Ben on to the board a few months before the seed round to kind of help us through that process. We're a lot more formalized now. We have an investor director from Green Angel Ventures, Chris, who's really helpful, and he is really knowledgeable. And I think having more people on the board and having a bit more structure to it has really helped us as a business, actually, because it is really helpful to have someone giving, or a group of people giving a little bit more guidance and like accountability and all of those things that in a startup you're kind of lacking in structure sometimes when you're setting everything up for the first time.
Absolutely. And you mentioned earlier on in the call when you talked about knowing you wanted to go for angel investment because of the support that comes with that. Mm-hmm. What's that looked like for you in practice since raising that round? You mentioned there about having the investment director on the board, but how much support do you get from Green Angel generally? What does that look like day to day? And did you seek out specific expertise from the people within the Green Angels team to come on board, or did they sort of self-select? Yeah, talk me through that side of things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so in terms of who kind of invests, it's not something that we particularly have a say over. So that is just they kind of come to us. But I do think it's natural that the people that invest in us will have background in the business. They understand the business and they're going to be interested. So we have a lot of different investors that have expertise in every kind of area of the business. I think one of the ways that kind of all of our investors have been the most helpful. So we send out monthly updates, and quite often we'll put in, this is what we're needing help with at the moment. And so we've had kind of patent things going through, and then had an investor that says, unbeknownst to us, is very specialist in IP law and has, exactly the bit of advice that we needed, or someone who has a connection to the market, or investors will kind of send us grants and things that look relevant. So they're all really helpful in lots of really small ways, kind of all the time.
Yeah, so I suppose just making sure you stay engaged with them, and you do that mainly through a sort of monthly update. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we found that was just the simplest way to do it. So we send out a monthly update to all of our investors, and then we do have other kind of requirements in terms of like financial reporting and things, which we do, but we really like to kind of do the informal kind of monthly update as well, just because it's nice to have that kind of personal connection.
Yeah, on that side, on the kind of the mandated side of what you have to provide. So you mentioned some financial reporting. To what depth is that, and how frequently? And do you have to do impact reporting as well? What's the kind of onus on you, I suppose, to keep them up to date?
Yeah, so on the financial reporting, so there's some things we have to do that kind of yearly mark. So we have to kind of redo our budget and resubmit that kind of plan for the year's finances. And then quarterly is a kind of smaller brief update just on runway, kind of cash burn, like very basic, just sort of, metrics on how the business is doing. And sorry, what was the other part of your question that you asked?
Whether there was any impact reporting that you had to do at all?
We did do impact reporting at the time of investment. We haven't had to do any kind of following that, but we are in a little bit of a stage where we have just been doing R&D, and we've just recently, this last month, started our commercial pilots. So we're hoping to get lots of good impact metrics from those, but kind of up until this point, there hasn't really been too much that we've been able to report on, I guess.
Yeah, no, fair enough. And what were your kind of biggest learns from the process generally? So, you mentioned that you having raised more than you went into the process, going out to raise, has meant that you've got sufficient runway that you don't need to raise again for a year or so. But inevitably, at some point, you may have to. What have you learned from this process that you would take into the next one? What would you do differently next time? Or, what would you advise to somebody else going into that same process now?
Yeah, I think I would be a lot more organized this time. So I think last time a lot of what we did felt very reactive. And that was partly because we didn't quite know at first what was going to be required of us. And there will always be some, reactivity to the feedback. But we started talking to investors and we didn't really have the full data room set up. And so when people would ask for it, we were kind of scrambling to create certain documents as and when, because we had a plan, but we didn't really have it written down. So I think I would come and I, would build all of that beforehand, send it out to a few friendly investors for kind of advice and feedback first, rather than going out to new investors. And I also think being strategic in who to approach when, because we kind of created a bit of a long list and then just started going through it, but a bit more prioritization and maybe kind of almost starting with the investors that you would love to be on board, but maybe aren't your number one choice as well, and kind of getting that feedback, but not kind of ruining the relationship, I guess, with your first choice if you're not quite prepared enough for it. So I think having a bit more of a pipelined, approach to it, we've become a lot more process focused kind of throughout the investment round last time. And I would start off with a bit more of that process in place at the beginning.
I like that strategy. So sort of testing it almost on a couple of investors that you would like to get over the line, but just using them almost to find out where the weaknesses are, how you could hone that approach so that when you go for the ones you really, really, really want, you've nailed it down.
Yeah, exactly. Because all of our investment documents change so much throughout the process, and we got feedback on I think the overall plan didn't change that much, but the way that we spoke about it and the way that we explained it and all of that changed hugely. So I think doing a little bit of that beforehand with existing investors or with ones that that will be quite generous with their time is always a useful thing to do.
Absolutely. And on that point, that sort of honing of the message and being able to kind of communicate it in a way that speaks to what the investor's looking for rather than what you thought they might be looking for. Where was the disconnect? Well, disconnect's probably the wrong word, but where was the difference there? How did that evolve and change? And is there a kind of general trend in that you could share that other people might find value from? So maybe we were presenting it this way, but actually investors wanted to see it like this.
Mm-hmm. That's quite a hard one to answer, because I feel like everything changed in kind of really small ways. I don't know if there was one overarching thing. I think we definitely we rearranged maybe the messaging a little bit. So we were positioning ourselves because greenhouses is our first market. That's where the main focus of the company is. That's what we're working on day to day. So the pitch was very focused on that initially, even though we do have other markets we want to go into and kind of other potential applications of the technology. And I think if the investors weren't particular experts in that market, they were instantly going, this isn't a business for me. I'm going to kind of switch off from listening to this. So I think changing our positioning from the beginning of, we're a materials business, this is the technology and all its applications, and now I'm going to tell you about the specific first market that is our beachhead. That reframing just kind of meant you didn't lose people's interest kind of, in the first minute of your pitch. They actually realized that there's something in there for everyone a little bit more.
Yeah, no, that's really useful, because I think there'll be lots of businesses in that same boat where there's this big picture, long-term goal of the total addressable market, but actually we're just going to focus on this bit, but showing that bigger picture from the beginning to show the scope of what this could be. Yeah. Okay, great. And you mentioned about the data room and saying one of the learns there was perhaps not having everything together in the data room that you needed when you went into the process. For the benefit of anybody listening that has never done this before, what did you need? And what didn't you have? Like, where were the gaps? And if someone were going into this, what would be all the things they would, what are all the ducks they'd need to have in a row?
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, the main things, so we had a kind of a short form pitch deck that we started with. We then had a longer form one, and then all of the financials. And one of the things we also found really useful that investors liked was we had a Word document that was kind of a guide for the financials, because they can be quite long, and just explaining some of the assumptions and where to find certain bits of information so that it's a bit more easy to navigate. That was something that was quite helpful. They also wanted to see our plans for kind of product development, market launch, IP strategy, any other kind of existing partnerships and contracts, kind of letters of intent, MOUs, all of that kind of stuff, having that all together in one place. I think that was probably the core piece. And then there was a lot of other ancillary things which were left much more until the end. So I think you probably don't need to focus on them immediately, but kind of making sure that you've got EIS advanced assurance or SEIS advanced assurance, and all of the kind of legal documents of the company are in one easy to hand over place. That was very much kind of the last bit of the process, though.
Fab. And having raised that amount last year, what did that enable you to do, and what are you excited about for the remainder of this year with how you're going to utilize that investment and the plans that you've got?
Yeah, we've done so much with the money so far. So it's been about a year since we closed that investment round. We've more than doubled in size. We were 3 people and now we're 7 people. We are moving into a new lab soon as well, a kind of dedicated lab outside, rather than a shared lab, which is what we were in before. Over the last year, the big focus has been product development and scale up. So we've been making the kind of alterations to the product so that we noticed we would need to do in our last set of trials. And we've also been scaling up our production. So previously we were on very small scale, with kind of a few grams at a time. Now for our commercial pilots that we're doing, we've produced probably about 100 kilos in total over the last 3 months. And then we'll be moving into scale up phase 2, going up from that to probably tonnage kind of scale as well over the next year. So everything has been building really towards these commercial pilots. It's a really big kind of step for us in terms of reaching the market. So if they're successful this year, then we'll be moving ahead to kind of actual sales, hopefully from the beginning of next year.
That's really exciting. Are you able to say where the commercial pilots are, or is that?
Yes, I can talk about most of them. So we have 2 pilots, one of them with Vitacress. So they're one of the UK's leading salad and herb growers. So they produce all of the potted herbs you see in Tesco, for example. So we're doing some trials with them on their basil crops, and then we're also doing some with Flavour Fresh, who are a kind of berry and tomato producer. And so we're doing blackberry trials with them as well, starting tomorrow morning, actually.
Exciting. And do you go, you have to physically go there and sort of into the field and see it in action?
Yeah. We definitely want to go there. We probably wouldn't need to. They kind of handle it all themselves, but it's really useful to be there to learn more about how the coating is actually applied in practice and how we get the best coverage and all of these kind of things that we haven't had to really consider before when we've just been applying on a small test scale. One of the really interesting things in the industry at the moment is all the growers are moving from traditional kind of sprayers into using drones to spray the coatings onto the greenhouses. So they've been recently approved for use, and it's something that all of the growers we're working with are doing this year. But it does come with its own challenges. It's a slightly different way of applying, and we're kind of fine-tuning the process to make sure that we're making efficient use of the coating, efficient use of the drone, and getting it all done kind of quickly with the correct coverage of the coating.
Yeah, that's interesting. And is there a challenge around how much they can carry as a drone? Because I'd imagine it's fairly weighty if they're wanting to do several, you're talking tonnage, but yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. So they take about 50 litres at a time. So to cover kind of a hectare of growing, that would be quite a few trips, maybe sort of 10 trips or so. So that is something that, from the feedback we're getting over the last few weeks with the drone application, we potentially are going to look at kind of reformulating our product so that it is a little bit more efficient. So you don't have to spray quite as much volume of it, so that you can do fewer trips up and down. So that's something that I think we're looking to work with some of these drone companies on doing.
Interesting. That's amazing. Thank you so much for sharing all that with me. I really, really appreciate it. And if anybody wants to follow the Albotherm journey and see what you're doing, where can they do that?
So our LinkedIn page is where we put our most updates. So we're Albotherm on LinkedIn. We also do have updates on our website, www.albotherm.com.
Fantastic. That's amazing. Well, Molly, thank you so much for joining me today. Thank you so much for sharing all of that information. I think anybody out there that's either interested in it from an innovation and technology perspective will have gained a lot, and equally anybody that's an aspiring founder or a very early stage first-time founder that's about to go through that journey, I think hopefully will have learned a lot from you sharing that experience. So thank you so much.